All right, Vice's documentary series, Who Killed WCW, Episode 2. Going to be giving my thoughts on this one. I did already review the first one. Check the video on the uploads page here on the channel so you can see it. This is continuing where we left off. I don't really want to recap Episode 1 too much. That was more of an introductory episode, but I will say that Episode 1 that aired last week covered 95, 96, and maybe half of 97. I would say it's fair to say, or most of 97, I would say. And this one now, episode 2 is now going into late 97 and 98. Starting off with Bischoff discussing some of the moves that were being made at the time. And Bischoff brings up the acquisition of Bret the Hitman Hart from WWF, which was a massive deal, especially to me because that is my favorite wrestler of all time. Bret the Hitman Hart was my childhood favorite wrestler. He is... all these guys out here like Bryan Danielson and these guys, Bret Hart really paved the way for them with his style. He's my favorite of all time. Best there is, best there was, right? And the best there ever will be. I say that because it was a big move at the time. It was. It was a massive move, and among my friends who were watching wrestling at the time, we were kids, we thought WWF might actually be doomed. We really, even though we loved Stone Cold, we didn't think he was going to get to that level until he did. You know what I mean? Like, we knew he'd get there, but we didn't think it would happen at the right time. You know what I mean? I thought it would take longer. And obviously, Austin with Bret was magic. But I say that because they cover that, and they start going into the start of Thunder, which was not Eric Bischoff's idea. It was a phone call from Harvey Schiller that came probably from Ted or the networks because they wanted more wrestling. And that conversation sort of segues into WCW growing very fast and giving a lot of television, which wrestling's kind of like that now still. You had Nitro, you had Thunder, which was the expansion show. You had Saturday Night. And then those were all 2-hour shows. Nitro was 3 hours by this point. Let's not forget that. And then you also had WCW Pro, WCW Worldwide, and WCW Sunday Night Main Event, which I think was canceled somewhere along the way. Lots of wrestling. Before Nitro and Thunder, all your WCW wrestling was on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Maybe you get a Friday night slot or a Clash of the Champions on Thursday, but besides that, forget it. But there was a lot. And then in the Monday Night War era, they just kept getting bigger and bigger, and that is discussed here. Then they talk about the dilution of the NWO. The NWO, even after Sting won at Starrcade, was still over. And then in 98, you had these splinter groups. Like you had the NWO split with the Wolfpack and with the NWO Hollywood, the black and white. And you also had the Latino World Order, which was like a subgroup. And now WWE's version of the LWO has had more screen time than WCW's, even though it was a WCW creation. Think about that for a minute. That's funny. But the Wolfpack was basically the place for the cool heels. You had all the cool guys. Kevin Nash was the leader. You had Conan, the rapper. You had Lex Luger, who had the power. You had Randy Savage, who everybody loved. You know, you had all this. Like, NWO Wolfpack was a great group, and I remember it being over. The most competitive year in the Monday Night War was 98. That was the most competitive year because in 97 and 98, both companies, I think, were running red hot. 98 started to make some mistakes. So it wasn't as good as 97, but WWF was also super hot during this time period. And for good reason. The storylines got better. Like the storylines of the Attitude Era, you have to understand, people to this day that say they're the best angles, I disagree with that. I think the Bloodline may actually be the best angle, the way they executed that. But all the stuff they were doing back then, WWF, like, people were into it. And I think WCW in 98 still could have been competitive into 99 or even 2000, but that's when the wheels began to fall off in 98. Little by little, though. 99 is when the shipwreck happens. At this point, the documentary shifts entirely to talking about Goldberg. Like, there's an entire segment of this documentary dedicated to the story of Goldberg in 97, 98, which really was, people don't understand, unless you lived it, just how insanely popular Goldberg was. Like, Goldberg, I would say, the only guy in the entire business in 1998 who was more popular than Goldberg was probably Steve Austin. There was a short time period where Goldberg was more popular than Sting, Hulk Hogan, even The Rock. It was a very brief time period. In 98, he was red hot. And so talking about him makes sense because that was sort of their last gift, if that makes sense. And they ended up not really doing the best job they could with it, you understand? It obviously built up to the big Nitro show at the Georgia Dome where Goldberg won the title, and that was actually the last time that WCW ran, like the last night that WCW beat WWF in the ratings outside of the night after Halloween Havoc where they showed the main event from that show again. I believe that segment beat WWE big time because it was a pay-per-view main event given away on TV. And that was also discussed, like the big matches and whatnot. And then interestingly enough, they kind of go to how all this is going on at the same time. Meanwhile, WWF is catching up now with the new Attitude Era format. And they discuss how it was kind of a copy of the Nitro format. To me, wrestling formats, yes, definitely Nitro had a different vibe. There is truth to that, but the key behind good wrestling television is characters and doing some cool surprises and moments. That's what makes it fun. And both companies had a lot of that during this era. Then we go into the interesting stuff. The fact that Time Warner started to tell WCW as WWF got edgier and edgier and edgier, they started putting more and more limitations on what WCW could do. And you have to remember, not only was this like a super edgy time for wrestling, but it was super edgy for television. The late 90s was also the anime boom. The late 90s when South Park started. The late 90s is when television itself, the rules started to change and things got way, way, way more aggressive. The 80s were in many ways slowly getting there. They was kind of over the top. And like the 50s were just a happy time for all, it seems. I wasn't around back then, but I would assume. But the 90s, everything got edgy and aggressive, and Bischoff and WCW are being told to do the opposite. Then they start talking about Bischoff's decision to hand over power to Kevin Nash, which was criticized all throughout 98 when it happened, late 98, but really into 99 is when things really took a bad turn. And it's actually discussed here pretty honestly. Again, way more. They go way deeper in these Vice documentaries than kind of the crap that the WWE Network's Nitro Monday Night Wars documentary series. I talked about how much I hate those. This is doing what those should have done. Now, you could do a 25-part series on this story because there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it, but WWE's version always ends up being very, very biased. Vice is at least, in this situation, being more balanced. This is the first time I can remember all the parties, Goldberg, Bischoff, and Kevin Nash, discussing the decision to have Kevin Nash break Goldberg's streak, which to this day, people point the finger at that scene and say that is what killed WCW. I still think 3 weeks later, the Fingerpoke of Doom, 2 weeks, I think that did way more damage, but I could see it being a 1-2 punch situation. But they do talk about it. And even some of the wrestlers like Bret Hart, who of course hates Goldberg, or Kev, both of them say that that Goldberg was very green. They talk about how he accidentally hurt Scott Hall. Like, he's the world champion, but he's very green and has no idea what to do if things go wrong. Like, he's too new to the business to be the top guy. That's fair. The problem is that he was the only super hot thing they had besides the Wolfpack, and you don't want to kill one of the two hot things that you have. You want to keep them both hot. And that's what happened, is they took the guy, yeah, okay, he was green. Yes, he was new to wrestling. The point is, though, this man was extremely popular and enough to where he may have rivaled Austin had they not botched this. Now, let me tell you, one of the things that pissed me off about this documentary is Kevin Nash's reasoning for taking the belt off of Goldberg. He says that it's because baby faces always draw more money when they're chasing. Okay, that's logical, and it has been that way throughout history. He's not wrong about that. The problem is that when Goldberg lost at Starrcade, again, it's not that he lost necessarily, it's that they did nothing with him afterward. Remember what happened? The Fingerpoke of Doom happened. Hogan got the title back, and who did he feud with? Ric Flair for 3 months. You understand what I'm saying? Kevin Nash was off feuding with Rey Mysterio, and Goldberg was feuding with Bam Bam Bigelow. Where's the part where Goldberg chases Nash? In fact, throughout the entire summer of '99, Goldberg didn't even try and get a title shot or a rematch. It was horrible, atrocious booking. So, and he's trying to I like Kevin Nash. I'm a fan of his, but he's, as a wrestler, but he's not, dude, you can't say that if Goldberg didn't become the chaser. If Goldberg did chase Nash after losing at Starrcade and the money did go up and the drawing power did go up and the business did better, then his argument would make sense. But he never even tried to have Goldberg chase him because he wasn't even champion. It went back to Hogan, then to DDP. Well, no, it went to Ric Flair, then DDP in the 4-way at Spring Stampede. I genuinely believe that had Nash not dropped the title to Hogan in the Fingerpoke of Doom, and had Nash gone heel though, and had Goldberg chased Nash, or you have the Hogan-Nash alliance and you have Goldberg still feud with the NWO instead of going to feud with freaking Bam Bam Bigelow, and I think he even had a couple matches with Hack because that was Bam Bam's feud right around then. So you dropped him back to the mid-card, dude. Are you kidding me? Meanwhile, Eric Bischoff is on here basically saying, he's basically in a way trying to justify the decision, but the decision was proven to be a wrong one anyways. You can try and say, well, this is what we thought, and I understand that. But it's almost like they're trying to say that it wasn't as big of a deal as other people think it is. But remember, it wasn't one mistake. It was multiple mistakes that hurt WCW. At the end of this documentary series, the ultimate finale is probably going to end up with them saying that WCW died for multiple reasons. It was not one reason. There were many, 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 many reasons. It wasn't just Vince Russo. It wasn't just Kevin Nash. It wasn't just AOL Time Warner and Jamie Kellner. A lot of people. It wasn't just Randy Savage and Hogan's big contracts and Piper. A lot of people were responsible. There was a lot going on, a lot of moving parts in that story. And I cannot believe the ego of Kevin. I love Kevin Nash as a wrestler, dude, but dude, this is too much. This man said, I was over as fuck when I powerbombed Goldberg. Bro, we get it. Kevin Nash was definitely over. That's not why the crowd popped. The crowd popped because they realized that they were going to be part of history and that Starrcade would be the night where Goldberg's streak was beaten. It was more so that they were happy to be there and they were happy to be a part of a moment. That's what it was. They were part of a moment, and that's what moves us as people. It wasn't because Nash was over. It was because that was an important moment. And look where we're at now. We're 2 decades out. People are still talking about that. There's a documentary right now I'm reviewing that, is talking about this because of how important it was. And of course, we have now arrived at the January 4th, 99 Nitro, one of the most historic days in wrestling. The night where the Fingerpoke of Doom happened on Nitro, and meanwhile on Raw, Mick Foley won the world title from The Rock because Austin returned, and when that happened is the infamous story, everybody knows it, where Tony Schiavone, by orders of Eric Bischoff, spoils it because Raw was taped that night, and he spoils the finish, and instead of the fans sticking around for Nitro, they all switched the channel. And I think it was I believe the number was 450,000 people, or maybe it was 700,000. It was a lot of people switched over and saw Mick Foley win the title, and it helped Raw win the night because Nitro was on the way to winning that night. And also, you have to understand about that night, Nash and Goldberg having a match had been talked about and teased for almost a full year. The entire reason that the Wolfpack broke off from the NWO Hollywood was because Nash got tired of dealing with Hogan and that group of guys. And guys started to splinter off. So they were teasing a Goldberg-Hogan confrontation for a while in 98. Then they kind of went away from it and they kind of did their own thing. And there wasn't really a full Wolfpack versus Hollywood feud. It was just kind of in and out. And they had been subtly still building this match in the background. So I think if they had actually gone through with the match and not the finger poke, I think that may have actually, they would have won the night if they didn't spoil the Mick Foley thing. And I think that would have been a huge, I mean, that's such a big match that should be on pay-per-view. But again, it's the Georgia Dome, and you know, it was almost 40,000 people, 39,000, some crazy number like that. You know, it is what it is. And Bischoff tries to say in this documentary that this story was concocted by the NWO, like in universe, because they wanted to keep the belt in the family. That makes no sense because Kevin Nash was a part of the family and was world champion. Why would Kevin Nash, if you want to reform the NWO, which they did become the NWO Elite, ironically enough, with what that name wound up becoming. But the NWO Elite, which was Hogan and Nash, the Wolfpack and the Black and White united after January 9th, that could have still happened in other ways. And even if you didn't want to go in that direction, the title was still in the family because Nash was champion. So what the hell is he talking about? Like, this documentary, episode 2, is really making these guys look worse than episode 1 did. And I was coming into this because I know that every guy on here, every person has a different perspective of what happened. And I'm not one of those guys that only eats up what Meltzer says or what Bruce Pritchard says. I like listening to everyone and coming up with what I think happened in my own head based on all the information I have, right? I think everybody's like that. And Kevin Nash tries to say that people were mad at the Fingerpoke of Doom because they were swerved. No, they were mad because they got fucked out of a match that was teased over a year. They felt fucked because it's now more NWO and there's no Goldberg. And Conan, who's one of the realest guys on here, is like, yeah, like the fans felt fucked. That is what happened. They weren't mad because they were swerved. Wrestling fans love swerves. They were mad because they didn't get what was advertised. But it irritates me because, like, Kevin Nash on his podcast seems like a real motherfucker. But on here, it's like these guys just don't want to take any accountability. How many years has it been? And then Nash, who's supposed to be like this people-loving liberal, or he claims to be, says, my check didn't change. No, motherfucker, but all the dumb decisions that you and your friends made, like Bischoff and even people at Time Warner, this was just another piece of the puzzle. Because of your ass, which you won't take accountability for, there are people whose checks did change. Because when WCW went out of business, a lot of people lost their job. Okay, maybe Kevin Nash kept getting paid. He was getting paid millions. Fine, he's a star, right? But there were people who actually lost their job. What about compassion for them? Like, damn, maybe if we didn't make these mistakes. And he was just about to say, we made a lot of mistakes. And I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute. Is he actually going to admit that he fucked up? And then he's like, my check didn't change. But what about the people whose check did change? Jesus. Now, we finally get to the part that I was waiting for, why I'm watching this, and that's the Time Warner stuff. And they discuss that Bischoff's theory is that there were people in Time Warner that wanted to get rid of wrestling because they wanted the Nitro and Thunder time slot. They had waterfront property, as he says, an analogy, beachfront property, prime time. And so there were other shows and other networks and other producers on the networks that wanted those prime time slots for their shows, whether it be movies or other sports. That makes logical sense. I'm not saying that's the only thing that's to blame, but that makes logical sense. There were forces from within WCW, well, within Turner, that did not want WCW there, especially with the Time Warner merger. And remember, when that happened, Ted was not the top guy in power after the AOL portion. Don't forget that. So Ted couldn't save wrestling anymore. And to me, that's really what killed WCW. The fact that Ted couldn't hold on to it. But yeah, there were people that wanted to sabotage WCW from within the company because Time Warner and Turner were they had multiple smaller businesses beneath them that they had to put focus on. And a lot of folks who were in those businesses, in those departments, hated wrestling. That all makes perfect sense. And even Brad Siegel confirms it. And he would know because he was the executive in charge of TNT. He's the guy who put stuff on the channel. Bischoff tells this story that I hadn't heard before about how there was a conspiracy within Time Warner a conspiracy theory that Bischoff was handing out big contracts to wrestlers in exchange to get some money back from them. And he was under an investigation over that. And obviously he's going to believe that that was somebody within Time Warner trying to sabotage WCW. A lot of that story is here. And to me, that is the most interesting part of this whole thing. I have heard I know how WWF made a comeback with Mike Tyson. This story, I'm so familiar with it because that was my era and I was watching everything. I lived through it. But this type of stuff about the Time Warner corporate stuff behind the scenes, that's what I did not know about and why I'm even watching this to begin with. The most of the story I already know. That's the stuff I really want to know about, and I'm glad we got some here. Hopefully, well, I don't know if it's true because there's always two sides to every story, but I wouldn't be surprised because in corporations, that type of stuff does happen. And then for some reason at this point, instead of going into what happened in 99 after the finger poke, like the audience dropping off, the return of Hulk Hogan to his original character, Bischoff being sent home in September, I guess they're going to go into that in part 3. We actually fast forward all the way to Starrcade 99 and the story from Bret Hart and Goldberg and how Goldberg kicked Bret Hart. Very strange as to why they did this. I think it's because they probably couldn't figure out where to put this as far as what episode to put this in. But if you're looking at this story chronologically, there's a lot of stuff they're missing here. Like Russo coming over from WWF to WCW. Because the Bret Hart Goldberg match at Starrcade was booked by Russo. That was the 3-month angle they were going with when they first came in Halloween Havoc. Or right before Halloween Havoc. So what I'm trying to say is they're skipping ahead, and I'm thinking it's because they couldn't find where to fit this anywhere else. That's my guess. And this leads to the Goldberg and Bret Hart story with both of them, talking trash about each other in essence. Not like in a bad way, but Bret's still mad and very bitter about Goldberg being so green and, being so careless in the ring. And Goldberg's like, look, I've felt remorse for it, and I do believe that. I do believe that Goldberg actually has felt bad about ending Bret Hart's career. I mean, how could you not unless you were evil? But Bret is still continuing to berate this guy everywhere he goes, man, including in this documentary. I mean, I knew it was coming, but, dude, I have heard Bret Hart berate Goldberg more in the past, 5 years than at any time before. He's really feeling not being able to have had continued his career. And I get it. That's what he wanted to do his whole life. Even Goldberg says it, But you got to have some empathy here, too. So then finally they discuss Bischoff being removed from authority, which happened before the Bret Hart Goldberg match. So they probably could have still reversed the story, but I'm guessing the reason as to why they put it at the tail end of episode 2 is because of the Bischoff being removed and then Russo coming in makes for possibly a better cliffhanger for episode 3. It could be an editing thing, you know what I mean? But yes, the cliffhanger is the Vince Russo era is about to begin, which will be covered in episode 3. So I'm looking forward more so to episode 4, but this entry, not as good as episode 1. Might end up being my least favorite one just because, and it wasn't the editing or anything like that, even though there was that one weird edit. It was also the situation where you had a lot of guys just going out there and not taking accountability. And that's not the makers of the documentary's fault, but it did irritate me because it's been so many years now, just accept it. Don't justify it anymore. Anyways, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next video.